DNA most of us share. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report again tonight in this springtime of protest with mass arrests of pro-Palestinian demonstrators on college campuses across the nation. At UCLA Wednesday, the encampment there was declared an unlawful assembly, and its occupants were told to disperse. They didn't. After a roughly 9-hour standoff, police entered campus and forcibly took down the tents. More than 200 people have been arrested there. At Portland State University, officers cleared out a campus library that demonstrators had been occupying. On the other side of the country, at George Washington University, protesters clashed with police while attempting to put up a Palestinian flag. Just blocks away at the White House, President Biden delivered a message to the agitators Thursday morning.
So let me be clear. Peaceful protest in America. Violent protest is not protected. Peaceful protest is. It's against the law when violence occurs. Destroying property is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law. Vandalism, trespassing, breaking windows, shutting down campuses, forcing the cancellation of classes and graduations. None of this is a peaceful protest. Threatening people, intimidating people, instilling fear in people is not a peaceful protest. It's against the law.
In New York, Mayor Adams said outsiders were responsible for much of the behavior that crossed the line. And Thursday, the mayor reported that a substantial number of the protesters arrested were, in fact, not students. Now we return to the West Coast, where CBS News correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti joins us now from the UCLA campus. Jonathan, what is the mood like now on the campus after all these last 2 nights?
Yeah, John, good evening to you. There's a growing sense of frustration in how the campus responded to this protest. You can see behind me, the encampment has been cleared out, but a much different scene from what we saw unfold live on television earlier this morning. Hundreds of pro-Palestinian protesters had blockaded themselves inside using metal fences. They were joined in support by hundreds of other protesters on the other side of this blockade. Early this morning, as you mentioned, leading up to this story, UCLA declared this an unlawful gathering and warned that police would move in. Those warnings were unheeded, and around 2 o'clock this morning, police took action. Initially, they were blockaded by people, protesters who created a human link of sorts, locking their arms together. They then pushed through, firing these flashbangs that dispersed the crowd in what was an hours-long standoff that was marked by moments of chaos. When all was said and done, you had more than 200 people who were arrested, including at least 9 faculty members who joined in the protest. And I spoke with one of those faculty members who described his frustration specifically in the contradiction between the reaction today, the response this morning, and the response that police had just 2 nights ago here when counter-protesters showed up, what was described as a violent mob, as they threw things, different projectiles, into the group that was assembled here in this encampment, causing a lot of injuries. And for several hours, police watched on standby, not taking action. They finally did move in. They cleared out everyone, and there were no arrests. Those that we have spoken with wonder why there was so much leniency given to counter-protesters when there was such a reaction this morning to pro-Palestinian protesters, John.
And finally, Jonathan, classes are done soon. Summer break is about to begin. Is there any sense of what happens to the movement once the students are basically home for the year?
Yeah, it's a good question. At this point, the answer is unclear. So many of the pro-Palestinian students and protesters are calling for campuses to divest from companies that support Israel. We have seen Brown now taking steps considering this. It depends. If other campuses also start to consider whether or not to divest, we may see the protests calm down. If they don't do so, we may see those protests pick up and continue to gather for weeks to come, John.
Jonathan Vigliotti at UCLA. Thank you, Jonathan. As Jonathan mentioned, many of the students protesting are calling on their universities to divest from companies connected to Israel and the war in Gaza. We'll have more on what divestment actually means and the potential effects. That'll be later this hour. Israel's war cabinet met Thursday to discuss hostage deal negotiations with Hamas, as well as to plan for a potential military offensive in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. The meeting comes as Israeli leaders await a response from Hamas on the latest ceasefire proposal. The U.S. says the offer includes significant compromises by Israel, including a 6-week pause in fighting and the release of some Palestinian prisoners. The Israeli government is also facing pressure by the families of hostages held by Hamas. Protesters gathered outside the military headquarters in Tel Aviv Thursday, demanding a deal. They also urged Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu not to invade Rafah, arguing their loved ones could get killed. Israel believes Hamas still holds more than 100 people captive in Gaza. It is unclear how many of them are still alive. Back here in New York, the criminal trial of former President Donald Trump started with a hearing over alleged gag order violations again. Then came testimony from Keith Davidson, the lawyer who once represented Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, 2 women who had alleged sexual relationships with the former president. Davidson helped negotiate hush money deals for both of them with Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen. Trump's defense team has tried to distance the former president from those deals between Cohen and Davidson. If he didn't know about the deals, he would have no motive to falsify his business records to cover one of them up. But the jury was introduced to a new part of the story Thursday, a secret recording first made public in 2018, taken of Trump apparently being briefed on the plan to buy and bury McDougal's story. CBS News campaign reporter and attorney Katrina Kaufman joins me now. Katrina, what role did that, when that came out in 2018, that was a big deal, that recording. How did it play? What role did it play in the room there with the jury?
It felt significant for the jury to hear their voices saying those words, talking about how they had to set up a company to transfer the money. Cohen said he had talked to Alan Weisselberg about it. The number 150 was mentioned, so clearly this was related to the Karen McDougal deal. And the jury seemed quite riveted. They were looking at their screens where the transcripts were.
And this would be, for the jury, some of the first times Donald Trump has been in the room but not saying very much. And
yes.
So they're hearing his voice on the recording, and yet he's sitting right there. Was there, that just seems like a real moment in the room.
It did feel significant because, yes, so far Trump has always been sort of behind the scenes, and his team has really worked to show that he wasn't directly involved in any of these dealings. You know, there were conversations between Davidson and Cohen or Pecker and Cohen, but now we're actually hearing Trump's voice talking about these deals. And did the defense, which is to say Trump's lawyers, did they poke holes in Davidson's case? Did they address this recording? They definitely tried to the recording came out later, actually, with a different witness. But with Davidson, they tried to undermine his credibility, and they went through this whole cast of his former clients, reality TV show star Tila Tequila, Charlie Sheen, Hulk Hogan all came up. And they were trying to show this pattern of him getting settlements for celebrity clients, and they really were trying to say that he had a history of extortion, which he pushed back on, but they're definitely trying to change the portrayal of Davidson for the jury. So basically, impeach the witness, not necessarily take on the claims he's making directly. Is that a fair way to characterize it? They were also taking on claims that he made directly. For example, they brought up a conversation he had where he, I believe, said to Cohen that he thought they would lose leverage for the deal after the election because he said Stormy didn't think that Trump was actually going to win. So that really is counter to the prosecution's case where they're saying that they were trying to help him win the election. Davidson actually said that that wasn't something she had told him, but he did admit to saying it. Take us back then now to this gag order conversation. I thought the gag order thing was figured out. Trump was fined. Is this why are we at the gag order thing again? So we have more gag order violations, 4 more that were discussed today. And the prosecution is again asking for these $1,000 fines. The judge has made it clear that jail could be on the table. But for now, the prosecution says they don't want to distract from the case. And they know that throwing Trump in jail is just going to create so much chaos. So this hearing was about a few different ones. One was related to Michael Cohen, one was about the jury, and one was quite odd because it was about David Pecker, the former witness and National Enquirer publisher, but it was actually Trump saying that David Pecker was very nice. And what the prosecution said is that it shows Trump can use carrots and sticks. You know, he can be nice to you or he can tear you apart. And the judge admitted he's actually not so worried about that one, but he did seem very concerned about one where Trump was mentioning the jury because he really cares about the integrity of this process. He doesn't want them to feel threatened.
And there have been some jurors who have expressed concerns about that.
Absolutely, during jury selection.
Exactly. Wonderful. Katrina Kaufman, thank you so much.
Thank you, John.
Arizona's Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs has signed the bill repealing the state's 1864 abortion ban. The state legislature was able to narrowly pass the repeal Wednesday. It reverts Arizona law back to a 2022 statute allowing abortions up to 15 weeks into pregnancy. 2 Republicans joined all Democrats in the state Senate to overturn the Civil War-era law that bans abortions in nearly all cases. Since the repeal takes effect 90 days after the signing, the 1864 law will likely be law for a few weeks before the 2022 law becomes permanent. Authorities in Baltimore recovered the body of a 5th construction worker killed in the Francis Scott Key Bridge collapse. He's been identified as 49-year-old Miguel Luna, 3rd from the left on your screen. Baltimore nonprofit CASA says Luna was a husband, father of 3, and a 20-year resident of Maryland. There were 6 victims in last month's disaster. 1 body remains missing, that of 35-year-old Jose Minor Lopez. Everyday migrants are legally processed and enter the United States, but there are still thousands just waiting in Mexican facilities for their turn, sometimes for months. We'll have an exclusive look at what life is like at one of these facilities. Plus, the Biden administration has high hopes for the future as it plans to reclassify marijuana. We'll explain what it means to go from a Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
It's just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I used sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm is a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
Parts of Texas and the southern plains are dealing with severe storms. What you are seeing now is Kingwood, Texas, where multiple drivers had to be rescued from submerged cars. Officials say water levels may reach homes by Saturday. For more, here's Mike Bettis from our partners at the Weather Channel.
We know that more storms are back in our forecast, and they could pack everything from tornadoes to excessive winds, large hail, and of course flooding. That's been a major concern the past couple of days. A lot of neighborhoods, a lot of cities have gone underwater. The area we're most concerned about is going to include around College Station, Texas, over toward Lufkin and toward the Louisiana state line. But larger areas outside of that, all the way into the Midwest, could be at risk for some flooding. We've had so much rain lately, and now more heavy rain-producing storms will be an issue. Now, going into tomorrow, we're just going to reload the atmosphere. More storms possible. That's going to include through Abilene, Lubbock, but could extend all the way up to I-80 in Nebraska. Hail and winds, again, the primary threat in these locations. Here's the high-resolution future radar shows storms overnight down through Texas and Louisiana. More storms to fire up for us as we go into Friday across West Texas. Could extend all the way up towards, say, Sioux City. Those storms push their way eastbound as we get into Saturday morning and into the weekend. Large areas of heavy rain are possible from the plains all the way to the I-95 corridor. And for more in-depth coverage, you can watch the Weather Channel on cable and now live on your favorite TV streaming device.
Mike Bettis, thank you. Beijing is calling on local officials to step up their disaster preparedness in the wake of catastrophic flooding in southern China. This comes one day after a highway collapsed in southern China, killing at least 48 people. No official cause has been announced for the collapse, but it follows weeks of heavy rain. More rain is expected in the region through the weekend. The U.S. imposed new sanctions Wednesday on nearly 300 companies and people tied to Russia's weapons development program. More than a dozen companies based in China and Hong Kong were targeted in the recent move by both Treasury and State Departments. The Treasury Department says those involved have enabled Russia to acquire desperately needed technology and equipment from abroad. The sanctions come just weeks after Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's trip to China, where she warned Chinese officials about, quote, significant consequences for helping Russia's war effort. Several individuals linked to the death of Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny have also been sanctioned. The U.S. says it will also impose sanctions on entities linked to Russia's chemical and biological weapons programs. This comes after the State Department accused Russia of violating international law by allegedly using a choking agent against Ukrainian troops. The poison gas was widely used during World War I and is banned under the Chemical Weapons Convention. The sanctions also ban the import of Russian uranium for use in nuclear energy production. WNBA star Brittany Griner says she considered suicide during her first few weeks in a Russian jail. In an interview, Griner said that during her pre-trial detention, she was kept in a cell with black mold and a bloody mattress. She also said she had to cut fabric for Russian military uniforms. Griner was arrested in February of 2022 when Russian authorities found vape cartridges containing cannabis oil in her luggage. She was released 10 months later in a prisoner swap with Russia. If you or someone you know needs help, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline Network is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can call, text, or chat their hotline using the 3-digit number 988. Migrant crossings at the southern border are down this spring in a season that usually brings increases. But tens of thousands are actually waiting in Mexico, hoping to one day enter the United States. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camila Montoya Galvez spoke with some of those making the journey and the people who are trying to help them.
For Veronica, violence was the reason she and her family fled Zacatecas, Mexico. What happened there?
Secuestraron a mi niño de 14 años.
Your 14-year-old son was kidnapped there. I imagine you were really scared when that happened.
Sí, bastante.
You had to leave Zacatecas because of that kidnapping. How were you feeling when that happened?
Pues desesperada.
Desperate. Desperation was a common emotion we found in northern Mexico, where tens of thousands of migrants are waiting for a chance to come to the U.S. We met some of them inside this facility set up by the United Nations Migration Agency in the Mexican border city across El Paso, Texas. We're at a migrant reception center in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, The migrants here are waiting to get medical attention. The UN has brought doctors and nurses here to help migrants who are waiting to enter the U.S. The migrants who are coming here, are they generally wanting to come to the U.S.?
Yes. Like 90%.
92%,
yes.
You said. The migrants' needs are acute and wide-ranging, says Thiago Almeida with the United Nations Migration Agency, from vaccinations to mental health support.
A lot of traumas in the migrant route, like a violence, included the sexual violence.
They also need help with jobs and enrolling their children in schools while they wait in Mexico.
The application to get appointment to cross to United States, sometimes the time to stay here in Mexico is like 2 months or 3 months. So the people need support to stay here until get the appointment to cross to United States.
Many of these migrants are waiting months here in Mexico to get an appointment to enter the U.S. through the app.
Yes.
That app allows roughly 1,500 migrants to enter the U.S. at official border crossings each day. It's part of a broader Biden administration effort to discourage illegal crossings by offering migrants legal channels to come to the U.S. But the demand is far higher than the number of spots. In 2023 alone, Mexican officials reported processing nearly 800,000 migrants. And he said it's a record, it's unprecedented.
Yes, it is an unprecedented number, it is a record, and of course humanitarian needs coming with these people are also there.
Many of those people are young children traveling with their parents, including Samira Guadalupe's daughters. You want a better future?
Sí, para ellos.
For them, your daughters. Migrant apprehensions here along the U.S.-Mexico border dropped to roughly 129,000 in April. That is the second consecutive drop this year, and that is according to Border Patrol data obtained by CBS News. But that number does not include the roughly 1,500 migrants being processed on a daily basis at official border crossings. John?
Camilla, why have we seen the number drop that you just reported?
Well, U.S. officials, John, tell me that the main catalyst for this lower than expected level in illegal crossings is an aggressive crackdown by Mexican officials on the other side of this border. Over the past few months, Mexican officials have ramped up efforts to deport more migrants to southern Mexico near the Mexico-Guatemala border, and also to stop migrants from boarding trains and buses that would take them further into Mexico and closer to American soil. If you ask Governor Abbott in Texas, John, he would tell you that his actions, the deployment of razor wire, the deployment of National Guard troops, is also having an impact in these lower than expected levels of migration. And the Biden administration would also argue that it is increasing deportations, and that is having an impact of deterrence on some migrants. But what is objectively true, John, is that this is a very unusual trend. This is the first time during the Biden administration that illegal crossings have not spiked yet during the spring.
And before I lose you, Camilla, what surprised you the most when you were in Mexico with what you saw, including at that United Nations facility?
Something that really struck me and surprised me, John, is the number of children we saw in Mexico, in the shelters on the street and at that United Nations facility in Ciudad Juarez. United Nations officials tell us that about 60% of all the migrants they encounter are families traveling with children, and that obviously poses unique challenges for border officials, volunteers, and these UN officials, because migrant children have unique needs. They have special food requirements, and they also need to go to school. But we are told that many of them are not going to school, despite the fact that they're waiting months, as you heard, to get that appointment to be processed at official ports of entry under that app power system with their family members. And that, I think, really illustrates the humanitarian crisis that we often overlook on the Mexican side of the border, because it's not happening here in the U.S.
Camila Montoya Galvez in El Paso. Thank you, Camila. 6 years ago, archaeologists from the University of Cambridge, working in an Iraqi cave, removed dozens of small foil-wrapped blocks containing 200 pieces of skull. After 9 months of delicate piecework, the result: an image of a Neanderthal woman nicknamed Shanidar Z for where she was found. She died 75,000 years ago at age 40, with her left hand curled under her head and a rock behind it as a cushion. Scientists say this suggests the species that died out mysteriously 40,000 years ago may have had thoughts about death and its aftermath that were not so very different from their evolutionary cousins who have stuck around, some of whom share their DNA. We've been reporting for weeks now on the college campus protests across the nation over the war in Gaza, but what are students actually calling for? Coming up, we'll explain the demands for divestment and the effects it could cause. You're streaming the Daily Report.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes. Did you ever have these problems before the derailment? No, ma'am. This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here are some additions to our top stories. The lawyer who negotiated the hush money payments at the center of Donald Trump's New York City criminal trial took the stand again Thursday. Keith Davidson spoke about working with Trump's former attorney on deals ahead of the 2016 election to keep 2 women silent about alleged sexual encounters with the former president. A major highway in Connecticut has been shut down after a gasoline tanker crashed and burst into flames. I-95 runs all the way from Florida up to Maine, and it is the most used road in the United States. Officials say the portion of the interstate where the fire happened is expected to be closed for an indefinite period of time. President Biden pressed for order across American college campuses where protesters are rallying against the war in Gaza. Tensions have been escalating between demonstrators and police, leading to violent clashes and arrests. Many of the recent campus protests are occurring at universities with multi-billion-dollar endowments, I should say. And among students' demands is a call for their institutions to divest or end endowment investments in companies with ties to Israel. Their hope is that divesting creates economic pressure that leads to changes in Israel's treatment of Palestinians. So we asked CBS News reporter Erica Brown to speak to experts about those demands and their potential effects and whether any of this is even really possible. So, Erica, first let's start with the demands. What are they?
Yeah, and I spent the day, John, digging into this to figure out what are students asking for here, what does this entail, and what are the implications. So as you mentioned, students want their universities to divest from Israel. This means they want them to end their investments with companies that have ties to Israel. This, of course, in response to the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. Now, specific demands for divestment, that varies from school to school. But essentially, we're looking at three things generally that students are asking for. They want their universities to divest from Israeli businesses themselves, businesses doing business with Israel, and also defense-related manufacturers and weapons manufacturers. And so when we look at these three things, we start to see this mobilization across the United States. And so we see this connection also with the pro-Palestinian BDS movement, which stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanctions Against Israel. And they have their own list of targeted companies. But we also see parallels drawn between protesters today and protesters in the 1980s. College students advocating for their universities to divest from South Africa during apartheid. Now, even though those were successful in many cases, experts warned that the global landscape, the economic landscape, was very different, and the way that universities invested was different then too. Instead of focusing on stocks as they were then, now universities are focused with endowment managers, asset managers on index funds tied to Wall Street, private equity funds. When you're dealing with private equity funds, things get less transparent. And so the global landscape is a lot different than it was in the 80s.
Right. So you're not just pulling it from a single stock. It's mixed in with a whole bunch of other stocks. Let's imagine, when you talk to those experts, let's imagine a school could pull itself out of this. What would the effect be on Israel of that?
Yeah, so the economic impact, according to experts, is not likely to have the sort of effect that student protesters may think it will have. So if they divest, that essentially means that they're going to sell their investment. They say in this market, if you're selling an investment, especially if it's with a lucrative company, someone's going to buy that immediately. So instead of seeing a sort of gap or a lapse in business, you'll just see it shift hands from one institution or one investor to another. And so it won't have that sort of economic punch to the companies themselves or to Israel's economy itself.
And now what would it do, again, assuming this can happen, because as you made that very good point at the beginning, the financial instruments themselves are not so easy. You can't just kind of cross out one name. What would it do to the bottom line for the schools?
So I spoke to one expert who said endowments, that's what you need to focus on when you look at divestments. And an endowment is essentially, in their words, it's like the university's version of a 401k. It's a way that they can secure the financial future of the university with no intention of ever retiring. It's just going to grow and grow and grow. And so when you look at the way that they invest, they're looking to build returns. They're investing in ways strategically that's going to give them high returns that can help supplement their operating budget. And so when they're investing in lucrative companies, that return helps them fund some of the operating budgets. That includes faculty salaries, it can include financial aid services, it can include classrooms, infrastructure for the school. And so divesting in a way could have a sort of ripple effect on the excess that they need to help supplement the school's operating budget.
Erica Brown, thank you for chasing all of that down. We really appreciate it. On Capitol Hill, a bill was passed in the House Wednesday, largely in response to the campus protests. The Anti-Semitism Awareness Act would change the definition of anti-Semitism in the Civil Rights Act, adopting the one given by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. The alliance's examples of anti-Semitism include claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavor, and drawing comparisons to contemporary Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. First Amendment advocates have argued the definition is too broad and could lead to any statement critical of Israel being viewed as anti-Semitic. Campus protests also came up during a hearing on Capitol Hill Thursday. Two of the nation's top intelligence officials testified before the Senate Armed Services Committee Thursday, outlining threats Americans face around the world. Our Skylar Henry reports on the top concerns.
The heads of the U.S. intelligence agencies appeared on Capitol Hill and told lawmakers China, Russia, and Iran are increasingly working together against American interests.
China is working to develop its own form of multilateralism while deepening its relationship with Russia and Iran in particular.
Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, testified that China and Russia are making preparations for cyber attacks on the U.S. in case there is a war with America.
Both China and Russia effectively trying to pre-position themselves in ways that would allow them to conduct those kinds of attacks.
She said the vulnerabilities could, in most cases, be easily prevented.
And in virtually all of the attacks we've seen against U.S. critical infrastructure, cyber actors took advantage of default or weak passwords, unpatched known vulnerabilities, and poorly secured network connections to launch relatively simple attacks.
The intelligence chiefs say Iran is taking advantage of Israel's war with Hamas to expand its influence throughout the Middle East.
How the current conflict between Hamas and Israel is resolved is likely to determine regional dynamics for decades.
While Israel's war with Hamas has stirred tensions around the world, the intelligence chiefs say the college protests happening around the country aren't being stoked by misinformation on the internet, at least not yet.
Well, I would expect other countries to take advantage of the opportunity and use it as part of influence operations, but we'll continue to monitor that.
They say disinformation campaigns centered around the presidential election are in full swing. Skylar Henry, CBS News, Capitol Hill.
A bipartisan group of senators is calling for restrictions on the facial recognition technology used by TSA. 14 lawmakers shared their concerns over the technology violating travelers' privacy and civil liberties. In a letter on Thursday, TSA argued in a statement that its facial technology has proven to improve security effectiveness, efficiency, and the passenger experience. The tech is currently being used at 84 airports throughout the U.S., and there are plans to expand its use. For more than 5 decades, marijuana has been classified as a Schedule I drug in the United States, meaning it had no accepted medical use and is considered to be highly addictive. But during those roughly 5 decades, the number of Americans saying they had tried the drug jumped from 4% to over 50%. In the spirit of that cultural shift, earlier this week, the Biden administration announced historic plans to change the classification. Marijuana is currently legal in 38 states for medical use to treat nausea, pain, and other symptoms. 24 states, plus Washington, D.C., have legalized it for recreational use for Americans 21 and older. If marijuana is reclassified from Schedule I to Schedule III, that would mean the government believes there is legitimate medical use for marijuana, and it is less addictive than certain prescription opioids like OxyContin. It wouldn't change much for the casual user, though. An estimated 16% of Americans smoke marijuana, according to Gallup. But the suppliers of those users, cannabis companies and dispensaries, would benefit from the removal of financial restrictions around selling a Schedule I drug. Reclassification would also eliminate restrictions on marijuana research. But a Schedule III downgrade does not mean pot would be sold at the corner store, but it would still be considered a controlled substance, like ketamine, that would require a prescription. A recent Pew report said nearly 60% of Americans think marijuana should be legal, but while President Biden has pardoned thousands of Americans for simple possession offenses, this change will not make the drug legal nationwide. People could still be arrested and prosecuted at the federal level for possession or distribution. But the Justice Department no longer prioritizes cases centered around marijuana possession in states that legalize the drug. According to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, arrests related to marijuana have dropped an average 11% each year since fiscal year 2012. Georgia is home to the nation's newest nuclear reactor. It's bringing clean energy to the state, but it's been a complicated process to get there. We'll explore the project, which has run over budget and way past its completion date. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, You have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go. You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking. Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discoveries, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels. 100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Consumption of lead has been linked to nervous system damage and learning disabilities, as well as cardiovascular, kidney, and reproductive problems. And yet, the Environmental Protection Agency estimates more than 9 million lead pipes are still used to transport water in the United States. In 2021, Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which dedicated $15 billion to replacing lead pipes. And Thursday, President Biden announced the new round of funding for the effort.
Today, we're releasing the third installment of that funding, an additional $3 billion nationwide, which will bring the total to $250 million for North Carolina so far, including here in Wilmington.
The Biden administration estimates its funding so far will help replace nearly 2 million lead pipes nationwide. It says it's also created 200,000 jobs for water infrastructure projects. A second new reactor has come online at the Vogtle nuclear power site, making it the largest producer of carbon-free energy in the country, according to Georgia Power. Unit 4 comes online less than a year after Unit 3 did. Together, they are the first nuclear reactors built from scratch in the U.S. in more than 30 years. They're expected to crank out 30 million megawatt hours of energy yearly, enough for 1 million homes. For more on this, I'm joined by Drew Cann, a climate and environment reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. So the project was expected to begin producing power roughly 7 years ago. So what took so long?
That's correct. Yes, the first of the two new reactors was supposed to come online in 2016, and the second was supposed to come online about a year after. But the project ran into lots of problems along the way. The U.S. has not built new commercial nuclear reactors from scratch in over 3 decades. So there were construction quality issues. They essentially designed the project on along the way and had some problems there. So the project ended up reaching the finish line roughly 7 years later than expected. And the original cost estimate for the expansion of the nuclear power plant was about $14 billion. It ended up costing roughly $35 billion total among the four co-owners of the project.
And is there any specific reason for the cost, or just like everything in life, it costs more than you expect?
Well, I think it's worth noting that cost overruns on nuclear power plant projects are not necessarily a new thing. The two new reactors at Plant Vogtle actually joined two others that have been on the site running since the 1980s, and those also ran into issues with cost overruns. I think you talk to experts on the industry, Georgia Power as well. You know, we hadn't, as a country, done this in quite a while, and the quality of the electrical work, the cement, the steel that goes into a nuclear power plant, you know, you can't take people who are working building homes necessarily and immediately have them building a nuclear power plant and get it up to the quality that it needs to be. So there were a lot of issues there, and I think that certainly was contributed to the delays.
And Drew, help me understand the environmental impact, the environmental thinking around nuclear. It doesn't produce, you know, much carbon pollution, and yet this is the first one in a long time, as you've reported, and the popularity of nuclear is obviously it's not highly popular. Help me understand where it fits in the environmental picture.
Yeah, so the construction of the nuclear power plant obviously does contribute to global warming. All the concrete and steel that goes into it requires a lot of energy to produce. But once the plant is up and running, essentially all it emits to the atmosphere is water vapor, and it produces lots and lots of electricity. These two units combined will provide, you know, enough power to power 1 million homes. So I think, you know, scientists who are concerned about the climate, there's no denying that that nuclear can provide lots of energy and provide energy that's reliable and provides that baseload 24/7 electricity that, you know, our modern economy depends on. But I think there are a lot of questions about, you know, given the urgency of climate change, how viable of a solution it is, given that scientists say we need to be reducing emissions right now and don't necessarily have time for projects that take 10 to 15 years to reach the finish line.
And what's the safety profile now of nuclear? Obviously, when, you know, in the 70s, it was a huge issue and concern. What's the level of community concern around nuclear power now?
You know, I think nuclear is generally regarded as pretty safe. As you referenced, there have been some very serious high-profile incidents in past years. The Chernobyl disaster is probably the most well-known one. There was a partial meltdown at 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania, and then most recently, the disaster at Fukushima in Japan. So things don't go wrong often at these power plants, but when they do, there can be very serious consequences. There's also questions about what to do with the waste once the fuel is spent. Right now, it's basically just stored on the power plant sites in these enormous concrete casks, but that's not a long-term solution.
And then finally, where does nuclear fit in President Biden's environmental mix and energy mix?
So the Department of Energy is very interested in supporting the advancement of new nuclear, but currently there are no new commercial power plant projects, no order signed for new ones. There's interest in what are called small modular reactors, which are sort of a scaled down version of the Vogtle reactors, a little bit smaller. The thought is they'll be a little bit quicker, perhaps cheaper to build. But again, there's none of those in the pipeline. There's also a lot of interest from tech companies in these kind of reactors because there's been a proliferation in Georgia and other southeastern states of data centers, which are essentially warehouses packed with servers that power our digital lives, but they require lots of energy. And so our energy needs are growing at the same time we're trying to reduce our emissions. So it's a complicated problem.
Drew Cann with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Thanks very much, Drew.
Good to be with you.
The landmark deal between the Justice Department and Google trial, I should say. It's not a deal, that's for sure. The landmark trial is coming to a close this week. The DOJ has accused the tech giant of illegally abusing its power as a monopoly by paying Apple and other companies to automatically utilize the search engine on smartphones and web browsers. But Google claims that consumers use its search engine because it is the best option available to them. Experts say a ruling in the biggest antitrust case in a quarter century could change the way Google operates its business. They're off to the races. The 150th running of the Kentucky Derby is this weekend, but as it turns out, the horses of the present aren't that different from the ones of the past. We'll explain.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
For 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
At the CBS Evening News, we focus on solutions, finding solutions to healthcare problems, how much money we can spend on the groceries, finding solutions to help people understand what are the right choices to make for you and your family.
Olympic sprinters have gotten faster over the past 100 years, but that isn't the case for horses, at least those competing in the Kentucky Derby. Kentucky Derby race times, on average, haven't seen much movement since 1960, according to Sportico. The record of nearly 2 minutes has not been broken since it was set by Secretariat in 1973. The reason? Scientists believe that breeding horses for speed has reached or is near the cusp of its maximum potential. The 150th Kentucky Derby takes place this Saturday at the famous Churchill Downs racetrack. New research on ancient human hunter-gatherers is challenging the idea of what we as a species ate thousands of years ago. Scientists previously believed ancient humans primarily ate meat. Now, after analyzing bones and teeth found in Morocco dating back more than 13,000 years, researchers say plants were their primary source of dietary protein. That's similar to what was found in early farmers in the eastern Mediterranean, where modern-day farming was first documented. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. President Biden says order must prevail as police clash with pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses from California to Washington, D.C. Plus, the jury in Donald Trump's New York criminal trial hears new information about his alleged hush money payments from Stormy Daniels' ex-lawyer. We have an update on the case. And new details from the southern border, where crossings are down, but thousands are still waiting in Mexico, hoping to enter the United States. What we're learning from migrants and the people trying to help them. You're streaming CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government